before I was married, I didn't even have a concept for sex or even sexual joy or loneliness, what any of that even meant. And so now in my married relationship, it's a brand new concept that I'm learning and trying to find the right tools for, which the connection codes has been the biggest and best tool that I have found so far. But I'm so excited that today, Bridgett Blood, certified coach, is coming on with Phyllis to talk about what sexual joy and sexual loneliness can look like as both a single person and then in conversation with Phyllis as a married woman. And her perspective is so many light bulb moments, so many beautiful ahas that can be applied whether you are single or you're married as you're navigating this huge part of our life and journey. Welcome to the Connection Codes podcast. This is the podcast where we break open the emotions that take us from being disconnected to connected in our relationships and in ourselves. I am your host, Tara Wages, and on today's podcast, we have certified coach Bridgett Blood and the incredible Phyllis Hill, who with her husband, Dr. Glenn Hill, created and founded the Connection Codes, which is the guide to human connection. And we're so glad you're here.
Hello, everyone. So I'm in the driver's seat today with this podcast as we are batching podcasts, and a lot of joy that Bridgett Blood is in the studio today. We talk a lot about, maybe you've heard this terminology, sexual joy and sexual loneliness. We just want to break that down some today. And I think for many of us, we're not comfortable with that terminology in our marriages. And I think about, wow, Bridgett is not even married and she uses that terminology. So it's like, okay, let's break this down to understand what is happening in our bodies and how to even use that terminology in a good way. Echo and I just did a moms/women's retreat in Texas. It is one of the things that Echo and I talked about before we presented was what I wished I would have learned early in life before I was ever in a relationship. For many of us, it's like some of that leads you to process trauma, like a lot of sadness that I was not taught any of this stuff. I didn't understand how to date well. I didn't understand how to marry well. I didn't understand all those things. So I think with that terminology that we use, sexual joy, sexual loneliness, let's break that down. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So welcome, Bridgett. So good to have you here.
Glad to be here.
So tell us what that terminology means to you.
Yeah. So I've been defining it as what it feels like in my body. Mm-hmm. That's really important to me, is always connecting back to not just the emotion in our head, but how does it actually show up in our bodies? And so for me, I say that sexual joy is a pushing force that pushes me towards play and connection. Mm-hmm. And sexual loneliness is a pulling force, letting me know where I need partnership.
Wow.
So it's just kind of the sexual joy I lean in. Sexual loneliness kind of not pulls in a bad way, but asks for connection towards myself.
Yeah.
So that's how I've been describing the difference of what that is. And oftentimes when we talk about it in the experience of desiring sexual activity, which of course it can be present there and it will be present there, but it's also present in just our embodied experience of our sexuality within our own body. So I can experience sexual joy and sexual loneliness that has nothing to do with sexual activity. You mentioned kind of what are the forming stories, looking at the trauma, what you wish you would have known. Immediately when you were saying that, one memory came to mind for me in my story. Mm-hmm. When I was in college, I did this program called the Woman Program. It was really cool. One of our professors designed it. She said, hey, there's all these rites of passage, right? There's marriage, there's adoption, there's all these things that our society celebrates, but there's not really a rite of passage from when you go from a girl to a woman. Mm. So she made this program and it developed over 4 pillars: our relationship to God, our relationship to others, our relationship to ourselves, and our relationship to creation. And so those were all very new kind of terms for me. I was like, what do you mean my relationship to God, my relationship to others? I kind of understand that, but what does that mean in this rite of passage journey? And so it was really cool. Once a month, we would join for tea and chocolate. And we would have a mentor that we met with once a month.
Wow.
And then we would gather as a group of girls. Each month, we would go through one of these pillars. And at the end of the program, we had a crossing over ceremony where all of the women wore gowns. And your mentor blessed you and welcomed you into womanhood with a beautiful handmade necklace that we all got. And so it was this really beautiful experience. However, when I was shopping for my gown for that event, panicked, lost my mind. I was working with my mentor, who was also a professor and pastor, and she was just really important to her, was understanding our bodies and blessing our sexuality. I was not comfortable with that. I grew up in a church to the point where I remember, whether it was spoken or unspoken, things like, if men and women are friends on Facebook, they'll have an affair. Like that level of fear of, there's something wrong with my body. My body is a sexual threat. I have to be on guard. I went through like making sure tank tops, like you couldn't have tank tops that were more than like 2 fingers below your collarbone, like all this stuff. So the idea of buying a gown in public, men could see me, women could see me. I lost my mind. I was panicked. I was like, oh, I don't feel good about this. And she kind of like would push me a little bit and say, hey, what about this dress? What about this dress? And I just sat there. I was mad. I was angry with her of like, this is firing my brain. This is wrong. This is sinful. Why are we talking about my body this way? And she just asked me the question. She's like, Bridgett, what do you believe about your body? And I remember I didn't talk. I literally left the thing and I didn't talk to her. I was like, I'm not ready. I was so flooded. Didn't have any connection codes tools way back then. And I was able just to process with her like, oh, I actually believe that my body's bad.
Yeah.
She really introduced this idea to me of, what if that's not true? What if the people that told us that actually missed out on God's good, beautiful design for our body?
Wow.
Or we've had Sam Jolman on the podcast, a sex therapist. Love his content on understanding sex in a different way. His book is called The Sex Talk You Never Got, which I really love, right? We all had that. And he talks about the fact that clothing is not about hiding shame, hiding the shame of our bodies. It's about veiling our glory. And so how different will I show up in the world to say, my sexual boundaries, the way that I dress, the way that I talk, the way that I communicate with men, like, is not because my body is a sexual threat that I need to protect them from. It's actually because my body is really good and filled with glory, and I want to share that with men that are ready to match me and build trust with me, depending on the level of relationship.
Wow. Well, it's interesting. I think I'm having such a reaction that this happened for you in college.
Yeah.
I'm like, no. You were already a woman when you got to college. And I listened to a class recently. It was actually really sacred space because it was for men, not for women. And it was a very private community of support. But part of what this man led other men through was the idea that we are abandoned when going through puberty.
Yes.
Which, again, I think based on what you were just saying, like, I'm really thankful there was a professor out there that wanted to speak into that. It's just like, wow, this is years and years after the fact, right? You guys had already gone through puberty. And that, yes, there is so much misunderstanding and damage done because we do abandon our kids when they are going through puberty. And I think about that, even the terminology, well, did you have the talk? And we make it one talk. And instead of realizing puberty lasts for years and we need to figure out how to partner with our kids through puberty, not abandon them, not pull away from them, definitely leave them on their own to discover what's happening with their bodies, what's happening with their emotions. It leads for most kids to a really dark place and a lot of trauma. It's like, okay, so specifically today, we're talking about just the terminology of sexual joy and sexual loneliness, which for many of you that are listening, you may have to unpack a whole ton of trauma to be able to even use that terminology. I love the way you defined it when you said the pushing away, the pulling away. Say that again as far as...
So sexual joy is a pushing force towards connection, towards sharing.
Wow.
Right? So an example of that, a girlfriend this morning texted me. She was literally going on a date with her husband, and she texted me and said, oh, I feel so much sexual joy about my hair. I look so good today.
Wow.
Right? It's I feel beautiful. I feel embodied. I like who I am. And I'm excited now because I have sexual joy embodied in me that now I get to go share with him. Right?
Wow.
And whatever
Love that
sexual joy
example.
takes place in their date, great, cool. Again, doesn't have to be sexual activity.
Right.
It can be the flirty play of bumping up against each other and making a cute joke or whispering in your ear. It can be something like that that's playful, but that pushing force that says, ooh, I want to move towards connection.
Wow.
Sexual joy or sexual loneliness on the other side is a pulling force that says, I need partnership. So I think I've given this example before. For me, one thing that really sticks out in my mind was I was bringing up groceries up to my apartment and I get to the door and I just go, ugh, so much sexual loneliness. I wish there was a beautiful dude to help me with these groceries. So the loneliness isn't I wish I had a sexual partner, which I do wish I had a sexual partner. But in that moment, it was I wish there was a man here to care for me.
Yeah.
Which is a good, beautiful thing in that. And I think the idea of those terms being uncomfortable is because the way that we've had to survive is to curse the really good things in us that wanted those things in the first place.
Yeah.
So if we wanted connection, or let's just even take the sexual part out of it. Let's just take the nurturing, the care, the comfort. All those things exist within sexual friendship. But how our brains learn to relate in sexual friendship happened oftentimes with our primary caregiver. And just the messages that we learned either told explicitly about our body or we absorbed from the environment that we were in. For me, I think about something recently. I've noticed that there was a dynamic in dating that I was replaying. And I was like, ooh, I had processed it with Glenn. I had processed it in a recent class I took. I've processed it with my friends. It's like, ooh, I feel some shame. I don't like the way Bridgett shows up in this dynamic, but I don't know how to get out of it. Like I keep replaying it over and over again. And so I felt really drawn to that cursing of, dude, grow up. You're a grown woman. You just need to figure this out. You need to stop doing this. This isn't healthy. This isn't helpful. And I'm like, okay, I know that resisting my own energy is not going to get me anywhere.
Yeah.
But if I actually pause for a second, right, and get curious, what's happening with Bridgett? That I'm repeating something that I know is out of alignment with my values. I have to be honest and say, what's actually really scary is to say that I want care.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot easier just to blame myself and say, well, if you didn't want care, right? If you just didn't need a man, you wouldn't feel sexual loneliness. You could just carry these groceries by yourself and you'd be fine. But that's, first of all, not regarding my own energy. And that's also not true. I do want connection and partnership, but that's really scary to name. And so I think if you are someone listening to this and you go, wow, I do feel a lot of fear. Maybe you are married, maybe you're not married. You're like me, I didn't even know if we could talk about this as a single person or as an individual or something outside of sexual friendship. I would go back to, where did you learn it was bad or shameful to be sexual? That'd probably be where I would start with that. Like, what were the messages that you heard? Curious for you. If you think about your upbringing, what did you learn about your body? Maybe what someone said to you or the environment. What do you remember from that being your story?
I think part of it too is just the terminology, the term sexual for many of, even for myself, is linked to sexual activity.
Yep.
So to go, wow, is that a term? Is the terminology sexual loneliness, sexual joy, is it even allowed to be present in a single? You're breaking down a term, like you're going, well, we are sexual beings.
Yes.
We would all agree to that.
Yep.
Right? We're all sexual beings. To go, okay, wow, just break down that word and realize, okay, I do know the terminology sexual being as far as, and even understanding the word. Because I think that as a married person, when I say I'm feeling sexual loneliness, it's usually quickly linked to a lack of sexual activity instead of realizing, oh, no, this also is partnership. It's connection. In a sense, it's bigger than just sexual activity and sexual joy. I know Glenn has shared this. If he expresses sexual joy and I follow his energy and I regard his experience, get curious, ask questions, and he processes it, often he will say it's as though we had been sexually active. Like it fills a void or a need. And he goes, I feel fear even quoting him, but that's such a mystery.
Yes.
There's a mystery in that.
Mm-hmm.
As a single person, using that terminology, what's the power in that?
Yeah, I think two things. For me, I've been doing a lot of work about the concept of your sexual story. So all the messages from birth to now that you carry in your body about what your body believes about the word sexual. And the idea that, again, from my perspective as a faith-based person, that covenant sexual activity was always meant to be a signpost to the divine mystery of God's love. So there's this space that I like to use the term sexual connection. Again, can be sexual activity, but it doesn't have to be, which I know that's that's really hard to wrap our brains around, which we'll talk about more. But sexual connection is designed to show us what's more and other. So it opens us up to, wow, there's more love here. There's more partnership here. There's connection here. But there's also this mystery of your body's very different than my body. There's something happening here on a divine level that says, oh, we live in a beautiful romance story. Just our life, just our being is beautiful. Just our being is sexual.
Yeah.
Again, we can talk forever and ever about that. And I think we'll also never reach the end of what that means. But I've been doing a lot of work around Christopher West and his work with theology of the body. He talks about sexual activity being a finite experience of an infinite reality. Maybe we have an easier time wrapping our mind around, okay, well, I understand what that looks like in sexual activity, but let's talk about what that looks like just within your own personal experience of who you are. So for me, sexual joy is my embodied experience that my body is good, that my femininity is good, and that my desire for sexual activity is good, but it actually points to this mystery that I am wired for what I call pleasure, delight, and play. So those things are 100% true to me, even if I am not currently sexually active, which I'm not. So concrete example, I showed up this morning to recording and I said, I got to share some sexual joy with you. And I do feel fear about sharing this. The fear is people are going to write a story about Bridgett. That's not true. And I have to just let that be okay, which is not, but it's going to have to be. So I was at the store the other day and I was with the grandchildren. And so I was taking care of kiddos and not really focusing on sexual joy. And I was down one of the lines. It was the Valentine's aisle. And there was a Twister game, but it wasn't just like the normal Twister game in the box. It was a Twister blanket. And immediately my brain went, I love that. That's so fun. I have a lot of sexual joy thinking about someday in my life having sexual play with the Twister game. And I'm like, immediately there's some shame. Not necessarily shame of desiring it, but shame of desiring it when I know that as far as right now, that's not going to be an action that I live out today. It could be, right? And I process that with one of my girlfriends. Like, I could go on a dating app and I could find a man to go have sexual play with me today. But then I go, that doesn't align with who Bridgett wants to be. And so I go, okay, then I just get to hold that loneliness too of, there's some loneliness. So there's not a lover here right now to play that. So I left the store. Again, I was taking care of kiddos. So I didn't really have a lot of space to process my own sexual joy. And then I was talking to a girlfriend and I was like, that feels really beautiful to me to bless that part of me that desires connection. Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to go buy that game and I'm going to go put it in a box and I'm probably going to bless it. I'm probably going to wrap it in pretty wrapping paper. And I'm either going to stick a note in it or I'm going to do something just to have some sort of tangible expression that my belief for a future partner and the desire that I have is really good. But I'm still left today as we're sitting and recording. I'm sitting with this emptiness of, I don't get to do sexy Twister today. I mean, I have autonomy to do that, but I'm not going to pursue that and abandon my own values for that. So I go, okay, well, what am I drawn to about Twister? For me, whenever we talk about, I call it sexual activation. So whenever you just feel a little bit of aliveness in you, whether it's a spark of sexual joy or talking about this, right? You're in a partnered pair and you're talking to someone else and you feel sexually activated and you go, oh my gosh, I feel so much shame. I don't want to have an affair. I don't want to whatever, but I feel something coming to life in me. Or, oh, I saw some explicit content I didn't mean to see, or that I purposely went to see. And I feel shame because I don't want to be doing that. Or I saw a billboard of a half-dressed person, or whatever it is. We have all these hundreds of moments where we have this sexual, what I call activation, that most of the time we just curse ourselves for. And we say, oh, you're bad for being activated by that. Instead of just saying, oh, you're just a sexual human. And so your brain said, this is a sex-related experience. It's your brain's just giving you information. So for me, can we talk about kind of the framework of what do you do when you feel that activation?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So when we find something sexually activating, for me today, that was Twister.
Yeah. Love that.
I ask myself a couple questions, and I do this with clients a lot too. When they bring something to me, they'll say, Bridgett, hey, I've had this sexual activation experience. I feel whatever about it. We go through these questions. Number one, what is the story that this activation is showing for me? For me, when I look at Twister, the story that I'm invited into is that sexual connection is fun and childlike and playful. That's a really beautiful story.
Yes.
The second question is, how does that story impact my personal sexual formation story? Immediately, since I saw that Twister, a memory that keeps coming up for me was a time when I was probably like 10 or 11, and I got in trouble at the dinner table for laughing too much. And even when we were doing the connection code certification, when I went through the program, I was working with one of our other coaches, and the question was, well, what emotion do you have the hardest time connecting to? And I said, oh, joy. I can sit in sadness for hours, and I don't have any problem with that. You want me to actually step into pleasure? You want me to step into joy? Oh, I'd rather not.
Yeah. Wow.
So all of a sudden I'm going, oh, there's something activating about Twister, the activation in the moment, because it awakened something in me where that childlike play and laughter and levity was actually scolded.
Wow. Yeah.
So I go, oh, that's right. Someone else could have walked by the Twister game at the store and not thought anything of it. For me, it was a sticky sexual activation because I have story around that thing.
Wow.
Where someone else could see something different and they have a sexual activation that I wouldn't have. So those are two questions. What is the story? How does that story impact my personal sexual formation story? 3, my favorite question. What does this tell me about what's missing in my life? And I go, I am missing playful touch. I'm like, I couldn't even tell you the last time that I felt playful touch. So I was like, okay, there's tons of sexual loneliness in that for me.
Yeah.
Again, not sexual loneliness of, desiring sexual activity, but sexual loneliness. And like, I don't know the last time I was laughing somebody and gave them a hug. I couldn't tell you. It's been weeks. It's been, I don't know. And then the fourth question is, how do I go get that missing piece in alignment with my values? And so I said, okay, I know what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to download a dating app and go get some guy to talk to me. I could use my sexual loneliness that way. If you're in a partnered experience, you could use sexual activity in this moment in a way that actually doesn't foster more sexual connection.
Wow.
It just fills a missing piece without honoring the story.
Wow.
So it's not necessarily, it can be about pursuit. And I'm so pro, let's pursue moments of sexual loneliness with curiosity. And if that leads to partnered play and sexual activity, that's great. But to say that might not always be what you need. The sexual loneliness may not always be a desire for sexual activity.
Right.
It might just be about connection.
Right.
So I go, okay, I have family coming into town this weekend. I go, my body kind of settled. These are people that love my body, that bless my body. These are people that I get to sit on the couch with and snuggle with, and we get to giggle and scroll through Instagram reels that are silly and watch a silly movie, and we get to put on our glitter Nashville boots, and we get to go out and have dinner with our lipstick. Like, these are people that I can share my body with, because that's how I want to use that sexual activation. I know that's like a huge framework. I'm a huge framework person, but first of all, this is why we have connection codes coaches to partner with you.
Wow.
And 2, we don't have to automatically jump from I'm terrified of sexual joy to I can run through a protocol. I just want to give this to people so they have a framework. If that's helpful, if you're like, I am curious about what's happening for me, but we don't have to jump there. We can do a smaller intro baby step, which is just what happens for me when I think about getting curious about my sexual joy and sexual loneliness.
It's fascinating. I don't have as many words right now or today because I'm like so challenged with a lot of what you're saying in the sense of, oh, I wish I'd heard that when I was single. Oh, my word. Oh, my goodness. How many are out there, not just women, I mean, men as well,
for sure.
that don't know how to process
Yeah.
like sexual loneliness or sexual joy and make decisions thinking that sexual activity is the answer. And, for our listeners today, I'm thinking you need to listen to this podcast multiple times to fit it into your own story. How comfortable are you with even the word sexual loneliness, sexual joy? Does it only represent sexual activity to you or lack of sexual activity to you? Just as Bridgett said, going back to your own narrative, like your own story, unpacking that. I loved the way you said the words pleasure,
delight, and play.
Pleasure, delight, and play. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, is my life, Phyllis, my life, do I have those three things? And how often? And as I've shared often on the podcast, I'm very task-oriented. And in some ways, finally went to the grocery store yesterday. That's a really big accomplishment in my life. And I actually bought a little bouquet of flowers.
Yeah, I love that.
And part of the way I gave myself permission, it had been marked down. So it's one of those grocery stores, the flowers that are older, they mark down. So it's like, okay, it didn't cost that much. That's a simple pleasure that I struggle with. I struggle allowing that in my life. I even thought about like Valentine's Day that's coming up and just like, okay, wow, is there simple pleasures in that for me? I would say feel some, I don't know, guilt or shame even saying it, but I think that Glenn and I kind of poo-poo those holidays. Like we don't find simple pleasures in those. We don't find playfulness in those. We just kind of ignore them. And it's interesting because this is a podcast batching day. So we've done some other podcasts and I realized that Glenn is searching for me to be more playful. He really is. That's his desire. I am almost one of those people that I had a client say this to me recently. She said she was raised, you work hard, then you get to play hard. Yeah. But yet, who's the judge of how hard I've worked, right? Who's the judge of that? Who even made that up? That's a horrible foundation for life. You got to work hard, then you get to play hard, or, work hard, play hard. There was a lot of judgment for this client of mine in that for her life. And so now that she's older and she's not in a 60-hour-a-week job, she's like, well, I'm not working hard, so I shouldn't be playing hard. Wow. And of course, her husband is like, let's go to Jamaica. Let's go on a cruise. Let's go to the beach. Let's go out. And she's ticking off well, I haven't worked hard enough for that. And I'm just wondering how much of that is part of my story right now, too, where I'm like, I don't even know how to describe that for myself. Just the idea of every day finding play. And I won't be able to quote this now, but we watched this movie Glenn and I did last night called Tag, based on a true story. Wall Street Journal ran the article probably 20 years ago, but then they made a movie out of it. And it's these older men, 30 years of their friendship, they've played tag.
Wow.
And in some ways, it's a hilarious movie, but their motto is that if you stop playing, I'll get it wrong, so I'm not quoting well, but you'll grow old. Yeah. So keep playing so you don't grow old, kind of thing. I just was really struck by that movie. First of all, I was struck by the friendship because I've moved so much in my life that friends from school is like a joke for my school years. And then the whole idea of that kind of silliness, that absurdity of being grown men in their, 40s and 50s playing tag all over the country, like chasing each other, being absurd. I'm just like, when do I ever get that silly even? Yeah. Even in my relationship with Glenn, when am I ever that silly? When am I ever that playful? When am I ever that fun? So this has been good. It gives me a lot to think about in what you've shared, and to realize that in processing sexual joy and sexual loneliness, it is not limited to sexual activity. Yep. Is really huge. Have we done the wheel? Oh, we got to do the wheel.
We do.
man, we're supposed to do these wheels earlier in the session. And then we get almost to the end and I'm like, oh, we didn't do the wheel. So feel guilt about that. So the wheel, if you are new to this podcast called The Connection Codes, and this is your first one, the wheel is a 4-minute tool that gets us in tune with what is happening with us. Yeah. So we get 2 minutes each, and love for you to start. We will definitely give you a way in the show notes to download the wheel so that you can as well start implementing this in your life. Because man, if you don't even know how to do this, you probably would have a real struggle finding the terminology sexual joy, sexual loneliness to even make sense. So
yeah, I get that. Okay. I'm going to do it around sexuality.
Okay.
Feel emotions just even saying it. I feel anger for the millions of messages that I have received as a woman that I'm a sexual threat to men.
Wow.
It has really messed up my capacity to have really beautiful, connected brothers. I'm really thankful there's been a lot of connection coders, men that I have been able to meet in the last couple of years that have helped me rewrite that narrative.
Wow.
But angry that my body still feels fear of, oh no, am I doing something wrong? Am I being bad?
Wow.
Shame. Shame where my own fear of connecting playfully and sensually to myself has led me to really cold and distant mechanisms with men, where men have experienced pain from me.
Wow.
In my own self-protection of just afraid of my own goodness.
Yeah.
Guilt where I have gotten really excited to teach people all this. I spend all day long every day thinking about this, which I don't know if that's a psychological disorder or not. But guilt where I've missed people by trying to teach something and missing their actual pain.
Wow.
Fear. Of course, there's fear there of I have worked really hard to find a lover and a partner that is equal to me, and he hasn't shown up in the story yet.
Yeah.
And so fear that will I go my whole life in vulnerability and kindness and openness and not get married.
Wow.
Lonely. There's tons of loneliness for me in the magnitude of how important this conversation is. And how important this conversation is for me in pursuing romantic relationships and finding a partner that has also valued these same sorts of topics.
Wow.
Sad that I experience exclusion as a single person.
Yeah.
I really, really, really love and champion not only the marriages of my married friends, but the sex lives of my friends, and want to give all the resources and all the partnering that I can for their sexual flourishing. And I feel a lot of sadness and probably hurt in that too, that just because I'm a Christian single woman, that people go, oh, well, what does she know? How can she partner with us? How can she be a blessing to our family?
Wow.
So there's a lot of hurt in that. Joy in the way that you've partnered with me in having these conversations and being open and holding pain with me. I mean, I have called you scream sobbing of just the level of sexual loneliness that I experience times. And thank you for not fixing it and just holding hope with me.
Wow. Absolutely. Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Okay. For me, wow. Yeah. Just a lot of anger that I did not know this stuff. And I'm unpacking a lot of anger right now that I'm sharing with Glenn, which is my goal for this year, which he's been asking for and he has been open to for a long time. And I've just had too much fear to really share at the core my anger. But so much of it is around sexuality and our story, our narrative. We've been married 44 and a half years, but together 48 and a half years. And that is the huge majority of my lifetime. And so a lot of anger in what was missed didn't have to be this way. So a lot of anger in that. I think fear is the next one. Fear of, wow, my narrative, my story has so much trauma in it. And the fear of, can I ever get to the end of that? Can I ever get to a place where, just like in today's conversation, like when I think of sexual loneliness, it's activity instead of so much more than that. Or sexual joy, like that idea of being playful, that idea of playful just in my lifestyle, not just in sexual activity, which I get that part. But to go, oh, you mean I could live a life of just embracing, finding that playfulness, which to me also the word silliness and just so, yeah, fear that I won't be able to get there. Feel probably guilt and shame in that as well, that I have not found that. I have not been that. Like Glenn so much wants me to be playful in everyday life. Yeah. Just that, I don't know what it is. Like I feel in a season right now, especially where I'm carrying too much weight. So feel some guilt and shame about that I can't just show up in this silly playfulness. Then let's see, I think definitely around this topic, just feel a lot of hurt from my childhood, didn't feel protected, didn't feel, even through puberty, like felt abandoned, feel a lot of hurt in that, feel sad that there was no one in my life that walked beside me through and taught me how to show up well in this world and show up well as a sexual being, helped me understand, all the things kind of that you shared as far as just, the messaging was that your body is bad. Feel a lot of sad in that. Definitely lonely in this topic. Like we just don't talk about it enough. And there's just loneliness in that as well. Am I missing joy? Joy that I do have a sexual partner. Yeah. Joy that I have the opportunity to live this out right now. Joy in that. I think that covered them. I try to visualize them in my head and go around, but I appreciate your openness, just your vulnerability in this, and just allowing this conversation to happen. Like, I think, again, I said it a little bit ago, this is one of those where it's like, I need to listen to that more than once to really understand what does happen for me, even in that terminology. Like, how does my body react to the idea of using that verbiage, sexual joy, sexual loneliness? So thank you so much, Bridgett Blood, for being here with us today. We'll put some things in the show notes so that you can, as I think we mentioned that Bridgett's one of our Connection Codes coaches. So if you go to connectioncodes.co/coaches, you can find us in that. You can find her. It's quite the journey. We encourage you to get on this journey with us. We did the core emotion wheel. We will put that in the show notes as well. If this is your first time and you're like, oh, okay, I need to learn how in the world to do what they just did, then we encourage you to start with the core emotion wheel. But thank you so much for being here with us today. And we do all of this because
you need this.
You deserve this. So let's do this.
Huge thanks to Bridgett for coming on today's podcast and having this vulnerable, authentic conversation with Phyllis. I know Phyllis shared how much she even gained from hearing Bridgett's perspective and in learning from her and thinking that sexual joy can be found way outside of sex. It can just be fun moments and creating a fun atmosphere in our life. And if you are on your journey and you're like, I don't even know how to start this conversation. We need so much help on our own sexual journey. That's what we have created Late Nights for. Dr. Glenn and Phyllis created a course that can help you learn how to communicate your wants, your needs, your desires, and also communicate the joy and the loneliness that you may be feeling sexually. If you've not already enrolled in Late Night, I highly encourage you to click the link in the show notes and gain these skills. It's a skill to be able to connect with your partner sexually. Thank you for showing up here every single week. We are honored that you share this space with us, and let's do this.